Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, Steelers Nation, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host extraordinaire, flying solo again today, Joe Kuzma. Well, almost solo. I have got an interesting show for you today, and you'll see why you'll listen why as we go forward, heading on into the weekend here, looking forward and previewing the matchup, the late afternoon matchup between the 2-0 Pittsburgh Steelers and the 2-0 Philadelphia Eagles. 4:25, part of the CBS doubleheader, which means we have the privilege or lack thereof of getting to listen to Phil Simms and Jim Nantz. Jim Nantz just kind of, he sits there, but I guarantee you one thing. Phil Simms is going to talk up how great Carson Wentz is, and he's also going to compare him in some way to Tom Brady and or Joe Flacco. Well, at the same time, I wonder if he'll have anything good to say about Big Ben. This will be an interesting matchup, the 78th regular season meeting between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, the Battle of Pennsylvania. They don't get to see each other very often, but even so, the Eagles hold a 46-28-3 advantage in the series. The Steelers are looking for their first win ever at the Eagles' home, Lincoln Financial Field. They are 0-1 there since that building opened, and the Steelers have not actually won in Philadelphia since October 24th, 1965. It is just... It's one of those things, you know. What else can you say about it? You got two unbeaten teams. One of these teams is going to come out a contender. One's going to be the pretender, and I'm going to tell you why that is in a second. It's mostly because of who the Eagles have played. I think this is a good test for the Steelers as well as the Eagles for this game. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the Eagles coming off of their 29-14 victory over the Chicago Bears on Monday Night Football. They do have a little bit shorter of a week, and they will head into a bye following this contest between the Steelers and themselves. The Eagles and Steelers will meet with these unbeaten records for the first time since 1954. And just another crazy statistic, and another one that Scott Perry would be proud of, one of my guests and also colleagues, an NFL historian and author of the NFL since 1970, although we're going to go back to 1960 on this one. The Eagles have the NFL's best record against the Steelers since 1960, 17-9-2. That is just odd, just really odd that one team has just such an advantage over the Steelers. You go back to all these historic things, but the Steelers haven't won in Philadelphia for so long, it makes you wonder if it will actually happen at some point. I do think that this Sunday is going to be the tipping point. I do think it could happen. And why could it happen? Well, there's a number of reasons, and of course I'm going to tell you, but just to tell you, just right out the gate, there's 8 teams in the NFL that are currently 2-0. One of them I really have a disdain for is the Baltimore Ravens. Of course, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are in that mix, but taking a look at this, Denver with the new QB, Houston with Brock Osweiler, he got a few starts last year, but relatively new QB, Sam Bradford and new Diggs, up in Minnesota, change of team. New England doing it with Jimmy Garoppolo. And now maybe Jacoby Brissett and Julian Edelman and whatever that mess is. I got sick of them talking about it. I'm glad we're past it already with the whole Thursday night football thing behind us. And then, of course, another guy that doesn't get a whole lot of, as Rodney Dangerfield and myself would say, respect. Eli Manning up there with the New York Giants. Hey, he's won a few Super Bowl rings. He's beaten an undefeated team that came into the Super Bowl. I give him a little bit of respect. I don't like Eli as much as I like Ben. I would never trade for Eli Manning, but if he was my guy, I wouldn't necessarily be too disappointed. I just think that he lives in the long shadow cast by one Peyton Manning. But, you know, the Steelers, back onto what this is really about, because who cares about the Mannings, right? The Steelers, big win over the Cincinnati Bengals. We're talking about the opponents that the Steelers have faced. Both teams, playoff teams last season. The Redskins winning the NFC least, as I like to say it. That's where the Eagles are coming from. So, once again, this is going to be their second NFC least opponent, but the Eagles weren't a playoff team last year. So the one thing I always worry about going into these games and headed on the road, road team maybe playing down, talking about maybe playing against rookie quarterbacks. And let me tell you, the Steelers have a very good track record against rookie quarterbacks, and we're going to be talking about that. Head on over to steelcityunderground.com. We also have a companion article for this. But in the last 5 seasons with Mike Tomlin as the head coach, the Steelers have faced a number of rookie QBs, the first of those being Blaine Gabbert. They got to face Andy Dalton twice in his rookie season, RG3, Brandon Weeden, Geno Smith in 2013, as well as EJ Manuel. And then they didn't face a rookie last year, but going back 2 years ago, the last one they faced was Zach Mettenberger, who actually had the best QB rating. He is now a Steeler, for those of you who forgot, back when he was with the Titans. And another tight game in that 2014 campaign was in Jacksonville with Blake Bortles. But let me tell you, you start looking down this list, the QB rating, 70.8, 61.8, 77.6. Andy Dalton kind of figured it out a little bit the last time they used there. RG3, not terrible. Well, I'm sorry. This isn't completion percentage. This is terrible. Their QB ratings, 72.8. Brandon Weeden had a 78.7. Geno Smith with the worst of the bunch, 48.8. EJ Manuel, 63.5. Blake Bortles had a 52. And like I said, Zach Mettenberger, 110.2. That's because he went 15 for 24, 263 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. He was not sacked at all in that game. Zach Mettenberger, by far the most successful rookie QB to face the Steelers, and that was the last one to face the Steelers. So I hope that's not a trend there where maybe we might have a problem with Carson Wentz. But before that, rookie QBs really, really couldn't chink the armor of the Steelers defense. In fact, we only had the one in Geno Smith that went for 201. No one else even threw for 200 yards. Maybe it's just because with the rookie QBs, you're trying to limit. You're not going to let them throw too many passes, although that's not necessarily true. Geno Smith threw 34 passes. EJ Manuel threw 39. Bortles threw 36. You had RG3 throwing 34, and even Dalton, the first time the Steelers met him, exactly 50% completion rate. He threw for 15 of 30, 170 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dalton, aside from Mettenberger, the only rookie QB the Steelers have faced that has thrown a pair of touchdowns against them. Many have thrown picks, and many have been sacked. All of them sacked, except for Zach Mettenberger and Andy Dalton in the first campaign, but Andy Dalton throwing through 2 picks there. So out of all of these games, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games against rookie QBs in the last 5 seasons against the Pittsburgh Steelers under either Dick LeBeau, Keith Butler. You know, it's still kind of the same staff, and Mike Tomlin getting prepared and they're all putting together a game plan. So I understand there was a transition from LeBeau. You have transitions in players all over the place, but this is just in general against rookie QBs. The Steelers have won all but one of those games, and that one was against Brandon Weeden. And that really, you know this game, though I've talked with many of you that have. It's the game that Charlie Batch started with 8 turnovers. Everybody was fumbling the ball. We just didn't want it. They were like, no, here, you take the football. And so the Steelers lost that game, and it was still a game they could have won. It was 20-14. It wasn't that. It was an ugly game if you're sitting there as a Steelers fan in Cleveland Browns Stadium, now rechristened First Energy Stadium. So that's the only one. All the rest of them over the last 5 years, the Steelers won. They haven't been the biggest scorers, 17-13, 24-17. There was the bigger one against the Bengals, 35-7 back in 2011. I had the privilege of being at that game, which was great. 27-12. 20-14 was the loss to the Browns. 19-6, 23-10, 17-9, and then 27-24 was the one right after rate that last time that they faced Zach Mettenberger, the last time they have when they faced Zach Mettenberger was the last time that they faced a rookie. So the Steelers doing pretty good there in that department. They're going to have to face Carson Wentz, however, who appears to be a little more superhuman than some of these rookies. I mean, they're 2-0 so far, right? Okay. So this is the teams that are 2-0, by the way, since 1990. The teams that have started 2-0 have a 63.2% chance to make it into the postseason. And if you're not 2-0, it's not necessarily over for you yet. It gets slightly worse than if you start 0-3 or 1-2. But if you're right at this point right now, if you happen to squeak out a victory and you're moving ahead, it's 59.5% of the teams since 2002, not 1990. I don't know why they put these statistics out the way they do, but this was the realignment when you had the Houston Texans come in as the new expansion team, and you started with the 4 divisions. You didn't have like an AFC Central anymore. We moved it to the North, and yada 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 yada. So it's not all said and done, and I think the realignment played a lot into that. So even so, we got two 2-0 teams, and this is where we stand. And most of the games in the NFL have been close. They've been close. However, 27 of the games have been within one score in the fourth quarter. That's the most ever through a season's first 2 weeks, which was back in 2013. And 21 games have been decided by 7 points or fewer, period. The second most through 2 weeks in NFL history. There were 22 in 2013. Some reason that year was very bizarre to start out. So another interesting statistic about the Eagles, before we get into the real meat and potatoes of the teams, is the rookie. It's hard to call him a rookie head coach, but he is a first-year head coach. He's been around in the league for a long time as a player and coach. Doug Peterson, formerly the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs. He is only the second rookie head coach since 1970 to win his team's first 2 games of the season by at least 15 points each. And you know who the other one was? The first one, the original, is our own Steelers, Mike Tomlin, who accomplished that back when he was a rookie head coach in 2007. So lots of stuff going on here. We talked about Doug Peterson, and we're talking about Carson Wentz. They get the big win over the Bears 29-14, but the Steelers themselves are creating some magic with guys that have been around forever. You have 33 years, 146 days, D'Angelo Williams is leading the NFL with 237 rushing yards, and he is the oldest player now, 33 years, 146 days, he's the oldest player in NFL history to rush for at least 200 yards in his team's first 2 games. That's pretty interesting, if you ask me. Wentz is also putting up some interesting statistics himself, passing for 190 yards and a touchdown last week, much like the now he hasn't turned the ball over in his first 2 games, and considering who they played, talking about that in a minute here, the Browns and the Bears, not exactly the most difficult of competition if you're going to ask me, but Wentz, those numbers, by the way, 190 and a touchdown against the Bears defense, that's very similar to the numbers that I just rattled off about all of these rookie QBs the Steelers have faced in the past. If they keep him under 200 yards, 1 touchdown, maybe put him on his backside 2 or 3 times in the game and force a turnover, that's a Steelers victory right there. I'm going to shoot from the hip and just say that right out the gate. But Wentz is the first rookie QB since 1970, since the merger, to start and win the team's first 2 games without throwing an interception. He has a 60.6% completion rating, and with those extra 190 yards tacked on, he has 468 for the year with 3 TDs. That's good for a 94.1 passer rating. However, his counterpart across the field, Ben Roethlisberger, leads the entire league with 6 touchdown passes, and he's looking for his 4th straight game in a row with 3 or more touchdown passes. He's 31-13 in his career versus the NFC with a 96.8 passer rating, and has won 4 of the last 5 interconference starts. Of course, the last loss being against the Legion of Boom and the Seattle Seahawks up in Seattle, the Pacific Northwest. So the Steelers, They're tied for an NFL lead with 8 total touchdowns. And the Steelers' defense has a third down conversion rate after having held the Bengals to 25% last week. They are at a solid 26.9% third down conversion rate, and its third down defense is the third best in the NFL through those first 2 weeks. The Steelers rank 4th in the NFL with an average of 31 points per game. They've also held their opponents to 55 and 46 yards rushing. Very important, as the Eagles had only combined for between Darren Sproles and Ryan Matthews and a few other contributors, a total of 100 yards rushing in their game against the Bears, who aren't necessarily, Nick Fangio, he was trying to bring some heat there. We're going to see the Steelers have been laying off. They haven't been sending any blitzes, and I think they're going to try and confuse Carson Wentz. I think they've confused the NFL through 2 weeks by they're getting pressure without sending any extra bodies and just laying in coverage. That's pretty interesting. And somebody wanted to bring up bend but don't break, but this is – I'm going to get to that in a second. Anyways, the Eagles, I don't see them being a particularly strong rushing football team, and the Steelers are always a strong defense against the run. The thing that they're going to have to contend with here is the Eagles rank first in the NFL in average time of possession. They dominated the Browns in time of possession with 39 minutes and 20 seconds, and then posted 36:05 against the Bears on Monday night. And they also are up there with points per game as well on average with 29. So Philadelphia has outscored their opponents, as I had said, a margin of 15 in each game, 58-24, and they lead the NFL in point differential per game with 17.0 on the dot, but also on the dot with 15.0. The Steelers right behind them with 2 less in point differential per game. That garbage time touchdown for Gio Bernard, pretty much the difference there. The Eagles rank 2nd in the NFL in points per game allowed in 2016 with 12.0. They played the Browns and the Bears. I'll come back to that. So they're really making a big point to Philadelphia media that the Eagles have held their opponents to 14 or fewer. I think most of the players that I've read quotes from and heard some of the press conferences from Doug Peterson and whatnot, they really do understand that most of the national media, I think they realize themselves, there's a chip on their shoulder. They're going to be playing at home. Always tough to go on the road, and Philadelphia is a hostile environment, but they realize that they played Cleveland, and they realize that they played Chicago, a very down and disorganized Chicago team, and a Chicago team that was really a really poor secondary. The Browns are what the Browns are. All of us already know that. We see them twice a year. They still can't get it together. It's the Eagles' defense that's pretty interesting. And when I have my guest caller in, who left a message on the hotline, 203-904-SCU, for those of you listeners who want to call in and comment about this Eagles game, please do so after the game. Catch it sometime on Sunday. Play your calls right on the air, and I'll answer if you have any questions about any of the play that happens. But the Eagles defense with 6 sacks by 5 different players. And did you know this? This was the interesting one that I picked up and did not know, that Philadelphia leads the NFC and ranks tied for 3rd in the NFL with 92 sacks since the start of 2014. So they get after the quarterback, and this is going to be a tall task for what I feel is an underrated and very good Steelers offensive line. Marquise Pouncey, just the biggest deal. The sack that was given up on Ben was by Big Al Alejandro Villanueva, and that's going to happen. He is still going through the paces, but everyone else on that offensive line, Ramon Foster, who's next to Big Al, and then you got the right side of your line with Gilbert and DeCastro. They're gonna make for some fits. I think the Steelers are still gonna have a good running game, and you still have to account for Antonio Brown as well. So Pittsburgh's very good against picking up off of the blitz. They've been very good at keeping Ben upright, and we've seen some very, very strong play, especially broken plays. We've seen some deep passes to Sammy Coates calling for the ball too. And more than likely, Marcus Wheaton, been a full participant in practice, will be available Sunday, no doubt, unless there's some further setback. The Eagles' defense, aside from hurting quarterbacks and putting out Robert Griffin III in his first game as a Cleveland Brown, and also Jay Cutler. And Jay Cutler's made of glass. Let's face it. So is RG3. Let's face it. Those guys are both made of glass. You're dealing with sharpened iron or steel. Steelers got it good. The blue collar, big guy, Big Ben. I mean, you're going to have to do a lot to take this guy out of the game, in my opinion. But you just got to watch out. The Eagles have forced 2 fumbles and 2 interceptions through these first 2 weeks, and they're third in the NFL in turnover differential. The Steelers themselves also forcing a number of turnovers. James Harrison, going back to last season, a regular season game in Week 17 against the Cleveland Browns, and through these first 2 games of this year has forced a turnover in 3 straight games. Not too bad for a 38-year-old, right? So you're looking at Wheaton coming back. Also on the injury report here, Roosevelt Nix limited in practice still with a back injury. We're going to see. I don't know. I don't expect him to be available for Sunday's game. But as far as the blocking role that he brings, if he were available, another good addition. Just reloading on this offense. Of course, I don't expect Zach Ertz to play in Sunday's game. It didn't really matter, though, because Trey Burton in his place caught 5 passes for 49 yards and also had a touchdown. So Ertz, usually a player you have to account for. I think he was mishandled a lot of times with the Chip Kelly offense with the Eagles. Doug Peterson, I mean, we're familiar with the way Andy Reid does things, and that's the way Philadelphia is trying to get back to the Andy Reid era that they had. But you had seen how the Chiefs had played the Steelers very close to the vest over the last few years that they've matched up. So, expect more of the same, and they always had Travis Kelce, and we're going to be talking about the Chiefs in a week here as well. This is almost going to be like 2 mirror images of games. So if the Steelers, whatever the Steelers screw up on Sunday, they're going to have to fix that for sure, because I feel, even though they're not playing like it, I feel the Kansas City Chiefs are they just have more talent or more depth at various positions than the Philadelphia Eagles. That's not to say they don't have their playmakers like Fletcher Cox, who's a defensive end you're going to have to account for. We talked about how the Eagles have hurt the QBs, and my caller right now, he would like to come on. And this is really great for those of you who cross over in the pro wrestling, and I love pro wrestling, especially the classic pro wrestling. If you know of the Rock and Roll Express, this is a guy who runs a parody account, and for protecting the innocent or the guilty, because he is an Eagles fan, you can follow him at the Eye of Gibson. He is a parody of Robert Gibson, half of the former 4-time NWA World Tag Team Champions, the Rock and Roll Express. But he's a contributor to also the 605 Super Podcast, which is a classic wrestling podcast aptly named for the old Superstation TBS 605 time slot on those Saturday nights. So without further ado, in quotes with my fingers up like Austin Powers, Robert Gibson is going to tell us why, and he gives us some good props too with the Steelers, I'm going to say that, but he's going to tell us why we need to look out for the Eagles.
At the Eye of Gibson, the heart of every woman. Well, I am the Eye of Gibson on Twitter, and I'm a lifelong Philadelphia Eagles fan. I'm sitting here in the garage of Gibson with my 2 dogs, Rat Slayer 1 and Rat Slayer 2. And we're watching VHS tapes of classic wrestling. And we thought we'd chime in on this weekend's Eagles-Steelers matchup. Here's how it's going to go down, Steelers fans. The Eagles have been taking out quarterbacks left and right. First RG3, and then Jay Cutler. Up next, Big Ben. You better have Charlie Batch on speed dial, because the Eagles defense is going to hit Big Ben with a Rock and Roll Express double drop kick. Steelers fans, you've got a first-class ticket to Carson City right there in Pennsylvania. All right, all kidding aside, I don't wish for anyone to get injured. You're only as good as your competition, and I believe this will be a very tough test for the Eagles. I love to switch back to the 4-3 defense. However, secondary is concerning. I see Antonio Brown having a huge bounce-back week. He's the best wide receiver in the league, but I don't have to tell you Steelers fans that. That should open things up again for D'Angelo Williams to have another huge day. Guessing that when Le'Veon Bell comes back, you got to have some kind of a committee. Like 2 years in a row this has happened. And D'Angelo looking good again. On the other side of the ball, we're going to see if Carson is the real deal. He handled the pressure of Monday Night Football incredibly well, but this is his first true test. Eagles have to be able to run the ball if they want to have any success or chance of winning. Battle of Pennsylvania only happens every 4 years, and I always look forward to it. Best of luck, Steelers fans. Eagles are 3-2 in the last 5 meetings. Make sure you check out the 605 Super Podcast, the best wrestling podcast in the world, and the Book in the Territory podcast for the old school meets new school. And follow me on Twitter at the Eye of Gibson. I'm a Robert Gibson parody account. And rock and roll will never die. See you this weekend, baby.
And once again, I want to thank my caller, the fake or parody Robert Gibson at the Eye of Gibson, and one of the hosts on the 605 Super Podcast, for giving us his thoughts about the Steelers and Eagles games coming up this Sunday. It's pretty interesting when you get somebody that doesn't follow the Steelers that close. There's a lot of mad props for Antonio Brown and what the Steelers are bringing to the table. I know Eagles fans are worried about this. I think Steelers fans are worried about this game too, because let's face it, like I said earlier, that whole Washington thing in the opener, I think that alleviated a lot of our ideas about how this team plays poorly on the road at times. They're already 2-0. They had a big game. They got over the hump with the Cincinnati Bengals already, and a big game at home. Let's hope they're just not riding that high and too overconfident and come out and just need to do the business. So the Steelers haven't won in Philadelphia since 1965. They need to break that streak, and I believe that they have the tools to do it because they're tied for the best red zone offense in the NFL. Among some other teams, they have a 100% touchdown rate. When they're in there from 20 on down, they're getting in for the TD this year, and that's something that we weren't accustomed to in the past. And on the other hand, when teams enter the red zone themselves against Pittsburgh, they need to face the best red zone defense. It's only giving up 14% touchdown rate. It's just amazing. And only one touchdown given up for the entire year so far. Well, the one touchdown, passing touchdown, whereas the Eagles were kind of bragging about only giving up the 2 touchdown passes or whatnot to the Cleveland Browns and the Chicago Bears. So I just see this, I'm just calling it like I see it. You have a rookie quarterback in Carson Wentz. You have a few weapons. You have somebody that could cause some problems. But Darren Sproles, I don't see Darren Sproles. You're still on a grass field there. He just doesn't seem like the zippy, fast player he was on that track that they had in New Orleans. And he's getting up there in age. Ryan Matthews is a player that's very athletic, has never fully lived up to his potential. And I don't think that's just my opinion. I think that's a general consensus. Usually has some injury problems as well and some health. So you have a rookie quarterback that's throwing to some unproven talents. There is Jordan Matthews. He poses a threat to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Zach Ertz will be out, but as I said, Trey Burton did an adequate job in Zach's absence. And then there's Dorial Green-Beckham and Nelson Aguilar, who were very high draft picks. And of course, Dorial Green-Beckham coming over from the Tennessee Titans in a trade. I haven't seen a whole lot from them, but most of you that watch Monday Night Football, if you did notice, the Eagles just came out throwing to start the game. I wonder if there'll be a similar game plan, because running the football, I don't know it's going to set up a whole lot. You're going to have to suck the Steelers in, and the Steelers haven't been really getting sucked in. They haven't been bringing the heat. They haven't brought a whole lot of blitzes. I heard or read somewhere, like maybe a handful of blitzes. I don't even think it's been 10 in 2 games combined. Almost unheard of when you're talking about Pittsburgh and their defense. So, ladies and gentlemen, of course, I am very biased. I would like to see the Steelers come out of this game 3-0, head into Sunday Night Football at home against Kansas City Chiefs team that has been up and down and struggling. They always seem to give us a problem. I don't want to look too far ahead into that. You have like a Kansas City clone here on the road on Sunday. Not necessarily I always want to keep saying a primetime game because it's part of the doubleheader. It is a national game that everyone will see. So we're going to see. We're going to see what North Dakota's Carson Wentz is capable of in this game. But the Steelers usually pretty solid against rookie QBs, and that's the most of my basis. I know Mike Tomlin was giving some props to the defense, especially the two safeties that the Eagles have. But the Eagles, they were repairing a secondary that was as bad as what Pittsburgh's was back in 2015. So the questions still remain there as to whether or not they've done it. I don't know that Jay Cutler necessarily had the pedigree, as Mike Tomlin would say, to exploit that defense as maybe Ben Roethlisberger would. He does have some of the tools. I mean, Alshon Jeffrey, he had 5 catches for 96 yards. You had 4 catches apiece for Kevin White and Eddie Royal, and even for Zach Miller also had 4. So, I mean, Cutler before he went out was 12 of 17 for 157 yards, but he had a pick. Brian Hoyer was 9 of 12 for 78. Those are some very efficient numbers there from what we would say maybe at the line or average NFL QBs against this Eagles defense. So I really do see this in the favor of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Eagles are going to have to, and I think we saw the worst of it. The jitters are out. I mean, we saw Antonio Brown drop a surefire pass. We also heard something, or somebody was wrote an article or was speculating that Antonio Brown is looking for his targets, and Ben said, "Oh, don't worry, he'll get his catches." He was targeted 11 times, and a lot of it was the weather, granted. But I think all the jitters are out. You got contributions from other players you weren't expecting anything from, like Xavier Grimble. Jesse James gets a touchdown in that game. D'Angelo Williams still plugging along, leading the NFL in rushing. Big Ben leading in touchdown passes. This just spells a lot of doom and gloom for the Eagles if the Steelers are on the same page. And I don't know that necessarily Ben was his sharpest last week. I think all the jitters are out. I think they had all the bad weather. It's supposed to be in the 70s and nice in Philadelphia unless something changes. That does not bode well for the Eagles. I am definitely very high on the Steelers this week. Last week, you could have got me to maybe flip a coin and say, oh, well, this is where the Bengals may win. But on paper and from what I've seen with my own eyes, just don't see it coming this week. So, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I appreciate you much more than you could ever imagine. Thank you for listening, and go Steelers. Until next time, be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.